Okay, sorry about that, you guys. I forgot I had that on loop. Welcome. We're going to try out a new thing here on the Rabbit Hole Guild. We're just going to call this the main feed, the main video feed, I guess. What we're going to do is run a whole bunch of previous episodes of, or chunks of previous episodes of The Unacceptables. And we're going to give a shout out to other podcasts that are doing great work and pointing out where you can go to get some more info and entertainment that way. We got a decent music catalog at our disposal, thanks to the Independent Artists Guild. Thanks a lot to you guys. And just general stuff like that, hopefully some interviews and things. So it's going to be kind of a mishmash system. We're going to have like a main hour long that's going to run throughout the day. At the top of the hour is when you'll get updates, new items, etc. So if you tune in at the top of the hour, you'll catch something new if you haven't seen the previous hour, and then we'll go through that content and try to update it as frequently throughout the day as possible. But yeah, you can flip over to this live anytime and see what we're doing, what's going on, etc. So I'll start out by sharing a bit from the episode of The Unacceptables last night. Last night was Fake News Tuesday, as always, at The Unacceptables. And we had a pretty good show, I think, and I hope that you feel the same. So without further ado, here is that.
And now, welcome to Fake News Tuesday with Scott Campbell and Jay Shaw. Let's take a look at some of the false news that we've seen over the course of the last week, because in this day and age, it is just as important to be able to spot fake news as real news. Here's the boys.
This is Fake News Tuesday, everybody. Welcome. We missed you on Sunday, as I'm sure you missed us. We had some technical difficulties on Sunday. It would appear as if we're having them again tonight. However, we're going to try and push through it. Jay, I think you've got a good clip for us that just happens to be about money and power.
It's any excuse to trash Western societies as racist and cruel. The truth simply doesn't matter. Here, for instance, children are taught that racist white officials stole generations of Aboriginal children from loving homes, up to 100,000 of them. In fact, our courts have not found a single such case. Now, if you think that's impossible, then surely the media wouldn't tell such stories without hard evidence. Let me now tell you of an astonishing bit of fake news that's now been exposed. We touched on this a little last year. It's gone boom now. Last year, the ABC reported shocking claims. The remains of 215 children had been found at the Kamloops Indian Residential School in Canada and were now being identified. Indigenous children allegedly dumped in unmarked graves at a Catholic school, stolen children that some activists claimed were murdered, children that our taxpayer-funded conversation website claimed had died a political death and been disappeared. Well, in Canada, those claims proved explosive. Protesters burned down a number of churches, not just Catholic ones, and tore down statues of Queen Victoria and even of Queen Elizabeth, who some activists falsely claimed had visited the school and could be behind these horrible crimes.
The Queen came visited for about 3 days, 2-3 days. I don't know how long it was. I think it was about 3 days actually, and a lot of children went missing there.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, that woke flake, didn't question a word of this story. He said it actually showed a dark and shameful chapter in Canadian history, told the Catholic Church to step up and ordered national flags to be flown at half-mast. He even seemed to excuse the church burning.
It is unacceptable and wrong that acts of vandalism and arson are being seen across the country, including against Catholic churches. One of my reflections is I understand the anger that's out there against the federal government, against institutions like the Catholic Church. It is real and it is fully understandable.
The Vancouver Art Gallery, meanwhile, laid out 215 pairs of children's shoes as a memorial. Police, protesters, even school children wore and tied orange ribbons in honour of the supposed dead. And I say supposed because not a single one of those 215 bodies has actually been found. Not one. You see, this whole story started when an activist anthropology lecturer announced that she'd used ground-penetrating radar to find evidence of a mass grave at this former school, but the results weren't certain. She said the bodies need to be dug up. The media didn't wait, of course, though, to treat speculation as fact, but now it seems the so-called bodies detected by this activist are just radar findings of tree roots and other soil disturbances. Now, it's true that some of the students who attended this school died, almost all from TB or influenza. 17 died at the hospital there, 8 on their own reservations during the holidays, and there's 23 we don't know about. But they died in Indian territory. It's hardly likely that wicked nuns killed them and hid them and no one knew. In fact, you can find a number of prominent Canadian Indians praising this school, including the first female chief in Canada's Northwest Territories, who said the years there were the best of her life. So now what? Do the statues go back up? Does the Prime Minister apologise for promoting what may in fact be a hoax and a smear of the Catholic Church? And does the ABC at least correct the record and admit that this story of Catholic horror was as dodgy as its smears of Cardinal George Pell?
The power of fake news. Take a story that's not even a story, run it, and then have a whole campaign based on something that's not a fact. That's incredible.
We created a national holiday for it.
We did, which is unbelievable. We have a national holiday for something that didn't happen. Now, I'm not saying residential schools didn't happen. I'm not saying they weren't a bad thing. We're not saying that. What we're saying is that this apparent mass grave that they had wasn't a real thing. It didn't happen. And a lot of you probably out there right now watching this or watching this later will be like, oh, no, it was real. No, it's not. It's not.
No. And they know in Australia because they were told, and you just weren't told as a Canadian that occurred. Australians were told.
You weren't told that as a Canadian, but if you looked for it and you paid attention, you had already heard that as a Canadian, and which is why it's even more absurd to me that people are still pushing on with it.
So there you go. We were talking about that. That was essentially there was a scientist who found some ground penetrating radar evidence to suggest that there may indeed be some bodies buried in a churchyard. There were 0. It was tree roots. And yet the Liberal government pushed on and fomented this whole huge issue simply to distract everybody from their COVID mandates that were had everybody up in arms and pissed off. And, that's kind of par for the course, but carrying on. Yeah, you just basically took the attention off of something that actually happened that was horrific, that people suffered from, and you focused that attention somewhere else that isn't even real. It was good for the Liberal Party. That's the only reason. And it's a pattern with this particular group of Liberals that scientists immediately go to work for them as soon as they need a story. That's exactly what happens. They just hire scientists, and that's the level that certain areas of science have slumped to in a lot of cases. And that's the amount that the government shouldn't be involved in things like that. Like, we're talking about Soviet Union stuff when we talk about the government putting their thumb on the scale of science. That is not supposed to ever happen.
Yeah,
ever.
You can't have a healthy scientific debate or a healthy scientific community if you've got the government controlling narrative. And unfortunately, what a lot of people don't realize is that a lot of science happens based on grants, unfortunately, because nobody wants to pay a scientist, right? So you've got government grants that you survive on. And the unfortunate thing is with that is that if you get a government grant, you're duty bound to find the result the government wants you to find. Because if you don't find that result, you won't get the funding. So it's not real science.
The only ones who are legit are the ones who are paid by the private sector.
Exactly.
Why? Because if that company pays them a bunch of money to do a study, that company has no recourse if they say, yeah, you're a piece of shit company. There's nothing that company can do to them. But the government, not quite the same routine, right?
That's true.
They can not only pull funding, they can go a lot further than that, and they can remove your certificates. I mean, they tried to do it with Peterson, right? If anybody thinks that didn't involve the Ontario and Canadian federal government in any way, that whole trying to get Jordan Peterson's license, you're crazy if you don't think the government was involved in that.
Well,
so yeah, I guess carrying on, that's the next step. And one of the big proponents, one of the big weapons that the governments, several governments have kind of utilized and put pressure on is the media, and one of those is Vice. So I mean, we're not talking about Vice News. We're not talking about some right-wing organization like Fox. We're talking about a group that's literally gone hardcore after people like Jordan Peterson, and this is kind of indicative of a larger situation. But when we look back, a lot of people seem to have forgotten or just didn't know in regards to Ukraine. It was 10 years ago that Russia annexed Crimea. I mean, it was a long, drawn-out process, but more or less 10 years ago. And in the intervening time, between like after that had occurred, there was pro-Russian separatists in another region of Ukraine, and of course the Ukrainian government, which was extremely corrupt, like deciding that Ukraine is better than Russia at this point is just like picking one dictator over another, one super corrupt organization over another. Except that in the case of the Ukraine, there are no Ukrainians being mass persecuted in Russia, and there are Russians being mass persecuted in Ukraine, and there has been for 15 years. So anyway, they had this pro-Russian sentiment in a Ukrainian province about 8 years ago, and Vice went to the region to investigate, because the general reporting was that these weren't actually people who lived in Ukraine. These were Russian agents, and these were Russian activists who had come into Ukraine to create a false narrative. So here's that.
Adrenaline rush? Check. The so-called Ukrainian counterterrorism operation started in earnest yesterday, but today a column of Ukrainian armor moving into Slavyansk, the focal point of the pro-Russia forces, basically gave up their equipment, and it's been brought here to the center of Slavyansk, where it's become a local amusement. Сейчас на окраине города драматург стоит колонна украинских военных. Как вы думаете, как они будут действовать дальше? Что случится с ними?
Ну, они тоже должны перейти на нашу сторону. Они сюда приехали, а мы им и хлеб, и соль. Все предлагаем. Вот, чтобы наше радушие, народное радушие.
То есть вы думаете, они тоже сдадут свое оружие? Технику?
Они не сдают оружие, они просто переходят, да, они могут это оружие забрать. Может свое оружие забрать и уехать в свои подразделения. Кто захочет остаться, те могут остаться. Потому что толку им делать? Воевать-то они все равно не будут.
А вы из Крыма?
Да.
И все ваши ребята из Крыма?
Нет, не все ребята с Крыма. Есть, здесь народно, здесь всего человек 5-6 с Крыма. Остальные кто с Днепропетровска, кто с Харькова, кто откуда.
А в присоединении Крыма к России вы участвовали непосредственно?
Конечно, в народном ополчении.
So there you see somebody who had been involved in what the Crimeans called and still call the liberation of Crimea. It's what they wanted. It's what they fought for. It took a while. They got it. The first act of Ukraine in response was to shut down the Crimean aqueduct, which carries drinking water to the Crimean Peninsula from the Ukraine, which has been in use for many years. It was built by the Soviet Union because that area, despite being a peninsula, doesn't have a lot of fresh water on it. It's got a lot of ocean, but not fresh water, and so that was Ukraine's first act, is to say, "Oh, you wanted to be part of Russia? Well, you don't get water." So, I think that the irony of that is pretty amazing. That you have the Ukrainian forces going into a Ukrainian region as a anti-Russian terrorism unit, and what they find there immediately is hordes and hordes of citizens who disarm them and send them away. This is, that's not terrorists you're experiencing. I mean, maybe by today's left-wing standards, anybody who protests against something that happens to be popular with the left is then a domestic terrorist. But in terms of the definition of terrorist and what terrorist means, that's totally and completely false. That's not at all terrorism. That's people actually standing up for their rights. And yes, standing up for your rights does sometimes involve misdemeanors. It involves ignoring curfews and things like that in the interests of protest. The rules change for protesting because the reason for that is these are anti-tyranny laws. This is to make sure that you can't have tyranny, because if the government is out of control, the people can rise, and the military and police force cannot be used as weapons against the people by the government simply because the people are unhappy with the government. Now, here in Canada, we've seen that weaponization, and hopefully, hopefully that does not occur again. Hopefully that law gets ossified, which, is to say strengthened a little bit, and we don't have to endure that. So carrying on with this Vice story.
This is the second column of Ukrainian armored personnel carriers. The Ukrainians are still in possession of them, but they've already been surrounded by a crowd of pro-Russia protesters who are trying to convince them to disarm and have stopped their column in its tracks as it was trying to move into Kramatorsk.
Приказы поступают в самый последний момент. То есть, пока у нас приказ слушать свои приказы командиров и все.
А вы слышали, что первая колонна украинских военных уже сдалась и переехала?
Нет, такой информации не было, не проходила такая информация.
Вам одно говорят, нам другое говорят. Так же самое там.
Кто кому врет, непонятно.
А вам описали, какого рода ваша миссия?
Изначально говорили, что граница,
учение. Говорят, что это учение у нас будет.
А вы что говорите?
Мы изначально говорили, что едем на границу, чтобы сохранить целостность именно территориальную. А так учение по сохранению границ.
Мы пришли протестовать против войск, против введения войск на мирную территорию. Здесь людей с оружием нет. Если бы они ехали бы на учения, они бы ехали не с рожками в автоматах заряженными. А сейчас они вот вооруженные. И сейчас вот сидят заряжены с автоматами, а рожки в автоматах. Это как понимать?
Вы за Россию или за целостность Украины?
Да, наверное, мы за Россию все-таки.
А вы местные?
Конечно, местные.
А из какого места?
Конкретно с Краматорска.
Но вы поддерживаете то, что народ вышел сюда и не пропускает эту колонну дальше.
Ну а для чего она дальше? Конечно.
А можно посмотреть паспорт?
Конечно нет, мы ж без паспортного режима и нету.
А вы тоже пришли для того, чтобы остановить эту колонну, чтобы она дальше не двигалась?
Да, зачем? Тут мирные жители.
Мы здесь живем, вот я здесь живу 5 километров. Здесь люди с Малоторановки, с Ивановки, со Старого.
Здесь все собрались, те, которые переживают за свое,
на Ивановку
дети,
тоже на город.
Пусть уезжают и дадут спокойно, чтобы наши дети в школу ходили. Что это такое, что мы ездим детей своих со школ забираем? Сейчас мои в
Переулок
машине.
Омский, 29.
Мои в
Это
машине.
Ивановка.
Я Молоторановская.
Вот мои документы. Вот.
Сейчас и мои пока.
Oh, sorry. Okay, so there we see Vice actually asking for the passports and documents and IDs. You can see that people are a little bit standoffish about it, as you or I would be. If somebody walks
because
up
when
to
I
me,
was a kid in Alberta,
if somebody walks up to me on the street and they say to me, and they ask me, "Are you a Russian spy?" If there's no camera present, they're probably going to get a punch in the nose. But if there is a camera present, then there's probably going to be a middle finger and go fuck yourself and get out of my face, etc. Because it's just a really offensive thing. Like nobody wants that to be projected at them by foreseeably, particularly another citizen, but by some news organization that's kind of asking them to prove their legitimacy as a citizen. I mean, person standing around in a field like ladies, the skinny ladies and things like these are all Russian KGB operatives. Like, give me a fucking break. Only if you watch Cold War movies as if they're the evening news would you actually believe that kind of nonsensical bullshit. But there it is. What are you going to do, right? So, and so what I wanted to draw the comparison to, because, like I said, this is 8 years ago that this story was launched. I'll put in the description of the video if you're watching this. In the next hour, I'll put in the description of the video the full Vice story, which is on YouTube. It's almost chilling, to be honest. How absolutely dead set on separation these Ukrainians were. When you look at the current situation and you look at what was reported from the Russian camp and from some outlets that weren't dominated by the left, is that these regions that Russia has recently moved into, they voted for separation, and everybody said, "Oh no, that's Russian interference in the elections." Which, I mean, turn on the TV anytime in the last 4.5 years, and you will catch the left lying about this election fraud and this Russian tampering in elections that's been going on since 2016, nonstop, right? And there's a tertiary benefit for them. Not only do they get to attempt to make Donald Trump look stupid, not only do they get extra votes, they also set up this whole. Well, no, Ukrainians don't want to be part of Russia. No, that's just Russian election tampering, and it normalized the idea so that all they have to say is that's Russian tampering, and they have their out. They don't have to explain any further because the work's already been done for them. That's what's awful and horrendous about the whole thing, and it's pretty brutal, but. That's what we're working with. We're working with total lies and total corruption all of the time, and it's pretty awful. It's pretty awful. So sorry, I'm just doing some work in the background here, queuing up a song for you. This is by Tilden Park, young Canadian rapper, great musician, I would say.
I'm in sync with the earth. 10 toes deep, flower child from the turf. I never switch sides, like even when I die, I'ma ride for the squad, let her ties in a hearse. I've been on a vibe, kinda hard to describe. I'm in between, I'm good and it's fine, but I'm tired of the grind. Then I come alive in the night to realize I'm in the middle of the time of my life. I'm never so packed for the stack, never lied on the rap. Got a bag from the way that I write it. Queen looking Tyson, through that I survived, doing 80 to the house. Then I hit it to the sky, changed haters on a tirade. Talking to their grip in their face, be still, let that hate stuff fade. We all want the same, we all want a meal in the safe. I wanna live like I'm trying to reach enlightenment. Trail spill from my lips, feel big from the bib. Take a sip till I pass out. Try and get grip, but it don't make sense. Cause you can lose life on this fast route. Yeah, turn thoughts to a cash cow. I might flip that to the glass house. I don't need the accolades, I'm in love with the chase. I just wanna eat, save a spot at the table. Beats with the slap, pin myself on the map. You long with the wind, but we knowing that it's cap. 5-hour flights, couple nights at the flat. To be real, couldn't see me making moves while I'm at. I'm still on the grind, limit time when I chat. I'm burning down sage, keep the demons away. When I write it, give a piece of myself to the page. I don't do it for the praise, love, that's just how I'm made.
Truth in the glass in the mirror.
Yeah.
Do it at me, old man, tryna pass interfere. You're the first one to talk, but the last one to hear. Eyes blurry, but I couldn't see the ass, and he cleared down. Start to feel like I'm on one. Settle in, I'll be here for the long run. I'm a slave for the cash, got snakes in the grass, no brakes on the ad, but it's all fun. We done seen it all, heard enough, give me space before I murder y'all. 10 bad bitches here, I'ma curve them all. 12 missed calls, and I still made a curtain call. Here to light it up, lighten up. Hear them talking, they ain't right enough, tighten up. Everything that I came for, I left with. I don't bang sets, I just bang on the set list. Going past supper when I came for the breakfast. Put me in your prayers, I might put you on the guest list. Young niggas in me reckless, gold in my soul, got the same on my necklace, bitch.
All right. That was, yeah, I don't know. I like that tune. Let us know in the comments what you think of it. We're going to play a bunch of, different, a little bit of a lot of different genres of music here and keep it as a broad, interesting, and maybe a little bit eclectic compilation of music. Back to the story that we were discussing.
People involved in these protests actually come from? Are they Russians? Are they locals? Are they Ukrainians from other parts of Ukraine who are activists especially involved in this? I've spoken to a few people and I've actually asked them to show me their documents had local registration. One guy had a license from the Kharkiv region, which is the neighboring region, and a few people told me that they hadn't brought their documents with them. So I can't conclude for sure if everybody's from here, but there are certainly locals here.
А их фоткать не надо. Их фоткать не надо. Проблема. Потому что я так сказал. Нет, того человека нельзя. Ну, правда, нельзя. Он при исполнении и так далее. Не надо.
Поговорите между собой.
These are the little green men. I think they've arrived to take the equipment.
Это вы обратно его ставите? Нет, я показывал, что я сдал боёв.
Все сдали? Да. И там тоже?
Не знаю, туда дошла очередь. Но здесь сдала машину.
Командир сказал сдать?
It looks like the soldiers have already given up their firing pins, so their handguns at least are useless at this point. I think these troops await the same fate as the column from earlier today, which gave up all their weapons and then packed up and left.
Давай пока первый БМД вот сюда вот. Носом становится вот здесь вот.
Ребят, отойдите в сторону, чтобы машины подошли.
So many uniforms here, I can't figure out who's doing what, but it looks like we've got Ukrainian officers talking to the pro-Russia officers about disarming and moving the column forward. So this one might be going to Slavyansk, and it might have switched sides to the Russian side.
Мы все делаем по команде. Офицер сказал, мы спрыгнули к машине, сдали оружие. Все. Какой приказ вы выполняли, когда сюда приехали? Ребята, все, сейчас начинают разоружение. Все. Камеры, убрали камеры, всех убрать. Ребята, люди, помогите. А что ты, дурак, сюда ехал? Ну, это вам сейчас прийти, не переживай.
Technical difficulties. I'm not sure if we're still live. I don't know if, yeah, it looks like YouTube bumped us. I'm not sure exactly why. I believe that I've filed all of the appropriate licenses for the music. Maybe YouTube gapped out. So I'm going to jump out and see if I can figure out what went on and how I can fix it. I'll be back.